If you hear thunder in a snowstorm, run. Locals referred to the whole thing as the hill. My point is, we were at this gas station at least once a day, often 2 or 3 times. The same was true for the hundreds of students who lived within blocks of the area. I wasn't the only one stopping in for supplies. It was filled with people, most of whom had stories similar to mine. I was standing in line holding some frozen pizzas, soda, and chips when I heard the clerk talking to the other customers about the coming storm. The forecast had escalated significantly. Behind the counter a small TV was playing. The weatherman came on, standing in front of a map of the Midwest that was basically a giant purple blob that covered our entire state. Jesus Christ, I said. The clerk reached over and turned up the volume. A hush fell over the people near the counter as everyone listened. Highway Patrol has issued a statement. Do not leave your homes. Do not travel. The interstates and highways had been shut down. Rescuers in snowmobiles were shuttling people trapped in their cars to the nearest rest areas. Plows had been called in for the night. Please, everyone, he said, stay home. If you don't, you will be on your own. The silence hung heavy and felt ominous, I guess would be the right word. Well, I guess I better go, said the person at the front of the line, breaking the tension and promptly. A few laughs from the growing number of people in line. Well, I'm not going anywhere, said the clerk. I have to work all night anyway. Besides, my apartment is right next door. She gestured toward the window, but instead of the blue apartment buildings, we should have been able to see the window was nothing but solid white. Just then the doors opened and 2 of my roommates ducked in. You guys have the same idea as me, I said, gesturing at my pizzas and snacks. No, AJ said, blazers stuck in the bookstore parking lot. I thought the blazer had 4-wheel drive, I said. It does, chimed in AJ's girlfriend Jenna. She'd shared his room for months, and for the most part, she was pretty cool. Damn, that sucks. Let's get our stuff and he'll drive us home, I said. Even though I'd been in the gas station less than 10 minutes, the small patch of concrete I had carefully parked my back tires on was filled in with 2 inches of snow. The tracks from where I drove in were almost completely filled in with snow. I was glad we didn't have to go far. By car, it was 2 blocks. Most of the time we walked, and from the back door to the gas station it was more like a half a block. Going slow and occasionally getting out to push, we managed to not only get home, but get the car in the driveway as well. My third and final roommate, Trevor, got home just after we did, pulling his tiny car in right behind mine. Making our way into the house, the snow was so deep had to walk in each other's footsteps and try not to fall over along the way. By the time we got inside, we were laughing and happy to be home. In the 4 that we shared with the apartment upstairs, we paused to stop the snow off our shoes and brush it off our clothes and coats. Holy shit, it's crazy out there, AJ said, stepping carefully out of his wet shoes onto the dry carpet in the living room. It's pretty when you look at it from in here, Jenna said, peering out the window at the houses across the street. It was definitely one of the prettier types of snow, the kind with big, fat, sticky flakes. Still, the uneasy feeling lurked in the back of my mind. At the hospitals, staff were staying over because the replacement staff couldn't get through. What else was there to do? We did what every college student does when there are 4 people in the same room. We played cards It was close to 4 to 3 in the afternoon when there was a knock on our door. One of the guys upstairs poked his head in. We didn't know the guys upstairs real well, but of the four, he was by far my favorite. His name was Metal, which I had been pretty pleased to find out was his actual last name. He was a bit of a power stoner, but was generally cool to be around. But to be fair, he was also a little bit crazy. "Guys, anyone want to go to the gas station with me?" he asked, in a wide-eyed, excited tone. "Not possible," AJ said, not looking up as he carefully arranged the cards in his hand. "Roads are all fucked. And not driving, dude, him walking," Metal said, as if he had thought of the most innovative weather problem solution of all time. "Anyone wanna come with?" "What are you getting?" I asked. "Smokes, certainly. Toilet paper, definitely. Beer, probably. Pizza, possibly." I shrugged him in. I got up and rummaged through my room for my warm coat and gloves. When I came back out of my bedroom, my roommates were holding out cash in my directions. "Hey, would you bring me a pack of smokes?" AJ said first. "And me," Jenna added. "Yeah, me too," said Trevor. "No way. You can come with us and buy your own," I said in a joking voice, but he right well knew I was also serious. "He'll send enough money for two, and you can have the other one," he offered. The others agreed. "No. Dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, cinco, seis," Metal sang, doing a strange little dance in the kitchen by the back door. "Good enough," I said, taking their money. Of course, at this time smokes only cost $1.87 a pack, so the payment wasn't as big as it would be today. We frequently made deals like this, especially when the weather was bad. Now, before you chastise me for going out, you need to remember a few things. First, it was only about 7 p.m., so it wasn't overly late. Second, if we walked through our backyard, the gas station was only about a half a block away. Nothing about going to the gas station felt unsafe to any of us. Just as we were getting ready to go, an odd yet familiar sound rumbled through the house. My brain couldn't quite register what it was right away because it was so out of place. "Was that thunder?" Jenna asked. "I think so. I heard it too," AJ confirmed. "That's crazy," I said. "I didn't think much of it at the time. When you're 20 and in college, well, you're damn near immortal, or at least you think you are." So we finished getting ready and made for the back door. From here, all we had to do was cross a small street, walk around the back, and the gas station would be right across the street. I didn't say anything to Metal, but I was starting to get a little nervous. He didn't seem to notice as he yammered away about all the things he always yammered about: music, drugs, Pulp Fiction, music and drugs, drugs and music, drugs and music, and Pulp Fiction. All we could do was keep moving and get back as soon as we can. I was kind of regretting the trip, but we were already halfway there. It would be stupid to turn back at this point. I could tell Metal was starting to feel uneasy too. When he got quiet and walking closer to me, I didn't mind. It was getting harder and harder to see, and that was unnerving enough. The thought of being out here alone was more than a little unpleasant. We began to make our way across the small road. Halfway across, the lightning flashed again, followed by a crack. But if it was actually as light as it seemed, we'd have been able to see more than we could. "What the fuck?" Metal shouted, and started pushing harder toward the bank. I had to struggle to keep up with him, but I knew he couldn't go far. The bank didn't have a parking lot. It was a small building with just enough room for one car to drive around to the drive-through. It served mostly college students, who were almost always on foot. Metal was getting farther ahead of me, and I could barely make out his black parka. "Metal," I shouted, but the words seemed muffled by the snow and swept away by the wind. I kept moving in the direction he had gone, even though I couldn't see his coat anymore. He wanted to get to the bank, and I didn't blame him. I feel a whole lot better when I was touching that wall, too. Another flash of lightning and another shriek. This time it sounded like it was right in front of me. I cried out in fear. The thunderclap hit, and the snow that followed knocked me off my feet. I came up sputtering, trying to clear the snow from my mouth and nose. "Metal!" I shouted again, and this time I thought I heard him reply from up ahead of me. I kept moving in the direction of the bank, and after a dozen or so trudging steps, I was blindsided by an arm that darted out of the swirling white wasteland, grabbed my shoulder, and yanked me hard in their direction. It was Metal. He was standing with his back against the wall of the bank. If he hadn't grabbed me, I'd have probably kept walking. Who knows what would have happened if I'd have missed the bank. It wasn't easy navigating around it. On this backside where we were, the snow had blown up against the wall, so it was deeper and harder to walk through. But neither of us wanted to leave the reassurance of the wall, even though the snow was harder to get through. I tried to shout to Metal that we needed to head for the floor with the ATM machine, but I don't know if he heard me. The snow was quiet, but also took the words out of your mouth as soon as you said them. It was just like talking underwater, muffled and dull. It had been a bad idea to try to walk to the gas station, and I regretted it with every step. God, it was great when my gloved fingers found the front corner of the bank building. I was way beyond wanting to be home or at the gas station. All I wanted was to be inside and not in this storm. I'd have climbed in a doghouse if we'd come across one. I ripped my scarf off and opened my coat so I could breathe again. I was so preoccupied with that. It took me a minute to notice Metal was frozen in place, staring into the corner of the little floor. "What is it?" I asked, my eyes following his gaze. "I thought I saw something," he said, in a puzzled voice. The snow in the corner swirled in and out, but for a second I did see something. I think I did. Something like a face, but gray skin, gray eyes. I took one. "We probably shouldn't smoke in here," I said. I'm sure he saw the same look on my face, too. He lit it carefully and then said in a quiet voice, "What are we gonna do, man?" I shrugged. "We could keep going," I said. "We could go back or we could stay here. That about sums up our choices. If we keep going, we're staying at the gas station until tomorrow," he said, lights flickering overhead. It wasn't ideal, but I had to agree with him. I couldn't imagine making the whole trip back after getting to the gas station. Either way, I think we need to stay together, I posited. He nodded slowly. "Maybe we should stay here." I couldn't deny it was tempting. It felt good to be out of the storm, but though it was warmer in here, it wasn't fully heated. "We feel warmer now," I said. "But is it actually warm enough to stay here? And if we wait too long, will we even be able to get anywhere else?" I asked. Overhead the light flickered again, Ominously, Mel considered this. If we head back home, we could probably make it to the chain-link fence, but after that, I'm not sure. The backyard was uphill. We may not be able to get to the back door. If we can't, we'll have to go around. So we are stuck deciding if we should try to camp down here or keep going to the gas station where, at least, we would have food and bathrooms. And cigarettes, I concluded. It bolstered both our moods. I was glad we were leaving the fort. The longer we sat, the more the swirls against the glass seemed to resemble faces, staring with dead eyes of white, swirling snow, dead eyes that looked at me, dead eyes that saw me. I don't know if Metal's eyes were playing the same tricks on him. I thought about asking, but he suddenly stood up, pulled his last smoke out of the pack. He lit it with a flare, zipped up his coat, and saluted, cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth just below one squinted eye. Soldier, he shouted. We will go out in that snow. We will walk across this street. We will acquire snacks. Those are our orders, maggot. Get your ass out there. He threw his scarf over one shoulder with a flourish and kicked open the door. The jovial moment ended as the snow hit us like we'd never left it. Metal grabbed me before I could start walking, and I realized he was standing. I thought at first Metal hadn't noticed that I fell. I shouted his name and felt a panic start to rise up. When his outstretched hand appeared in front of me, we clasped hands and started moving forward again. I felt no shame in holding a guy's hand at this point. I just didn't want to be alone. I'll be honest, I was starting to get pretty freaked out. The panic I felt was threatening to boil over. Being in the storm felt like being underwater, slow and foreign. Pretty, but deadly. I ran into something again, this time with my right leg. What the fuck, I said, reaching down to see what I had hit this time. But after fishing around for whatever it might be, I came up empty. You okay? Metal said, shouting with his head close to mine. Even a few inches away he sounded muffled and distant. Yeah, I shouted back, and we continued trudging forward. There was no point pretending we weren't pretty thoroughly run down at this point. I mean, we were both young, but we were also smokers. We were much more likely to be found playing guitar on top of the student union than in an intramural football game. At this point, the snow was closing in on waist deep, and it was almost impossible to step over it anymore. I worked to make a simple rhythm of it. Pick up your leg like you're marching. Pull it up and slide it back down in the snow. Then bring your other leg up to meet it. I would lead with my right foot for a while, then alternate to my left. We walked, and time stretched out behind us. Any sense I had of our position and pace was long gone. How long had we been walking? We left the house around 7. But neither of us were wearing watches. The more I thought about it, the harder it was to figure out. From the curb to the gas pumps would add another 15 or so. If I counted the snow steps for every good weather regular step, that would put me at about 130 snow steps to get to the pumps. But you see, I honestly thought my snow steps were larger than regular steps, based on how I had to put my foot down. But I was trying to be as conservative as possible. Was Metal doing the same? I hoped so, because at this point, any energy I had left after walking was being used to keep me from losing my shit. I counted in my head as we went. 1, and 2, and 3, and ... When I got to 150, I knew something was very, very wrong. I was about to try to ask Metal what he thought when lightning flashed all round us. It was up to our waist now. We fought to shake it off our arms and shoulders, but we could both feel it. The storm was gaining on us. I moved in front of Metal and took the front for a while. He had been forging the path for long enough. He had to be exhausted. I leaned in and shouted in his ear. We should have been there by now. I got a quick glimpse of his eyes a few inches from mine. He only gave a small nod. There was nothing we could do but keep walking. 157 and 158 and ... Just then I tripped over something and fell forward, face first into the snow. I panicked and flailed. The snow was packed in my mouth and ears. It was hard to breathe, and for a second I couldn't get away from it. It was like being underwater without any buoyancy. This time it was Metal's turn to fall on his ass, and my turn to help him up, but as I was pulling him onto his feet, the snow rippled around us, and without warning, Metal's hand was torn out of mine and he disappeared back down into the snow. I felt wildly for his hand and managed to get a hold of it. But Metal hadn't fallen. Something was pulling him. I could hear his thin, terrified screams being swallowed by the wind and snow. "Don't let go," he cried. I pulled my right glove off with my teeth and got my bare hand up under his sleeve, wrapped around his bare skin for traction. His warm skin felt hot and prickly against my cold fingers, but I held on as hard as I could, even when I knew that it had to hurt him like hell where I was pulling. Whatever had his legs yank harder, the storm thickened. I wish that was all I had seen, but the flashes of lightning showed so much more round us. In the layers of the light bursts, huge pale eel-like creatures swirl through the falling snow like water, the snow swirling like eddies in their wake. I could tell that Metal had seen them too. Then I felt it again, the movement under the snow, bumping hard against my leg. Jesus Christ, there was something alive out here with us. The next time the lightning flashed, I watched as white tendrils of snow slithered up from the snow behind Metal and wrapped themselves around his arms and then around his neck. The force of it made his eyes bulge and his skin began to turn purple. I shouldn't have been able to see any of it, or at least not as much as I saw. I know it sounds crazy, but it felt like the lightning kept flashing to make sure I saw the thing taking Metal, to make sure I saw him die. All I saw after that was a flash of black as Metal disappeared into the ocean of snow. I clutched my now useless arm against my chest and tried to look around, tried to see anything in the darkness. For a while, every time I contemplated giving up, the things in the snow would nudge me, toying with me like a cat with a mouse. But a person can only keep moving for so long in those conditions, no matter how determined they are. I just kept pushing forward in the direction I thought the gas station was. By that point I had stopped counting steps. I could only concentrate on one step at a time now. If I could just keep going, I still had a chance, right? A wild shrieking suddenly whipped in the wind around me just as something struck me hard in the face, nearly knocking me off my feet. A hot wetness trickled down my cheek and onto my coat. Suddenly brilliant white light flashed and flooded the world around me, followed by a turbulent slithering around my legs and waist under the snow. But this time the lightning revealed something else: the gas station. Metal and I had gotten off course, and I had nearly missed it. I lounged in the direction of it had been in great flailing strides that felt like running underwater. A slow-motion escape more frustrating than any nightmare. But I had seen the gas station. I knew I could make it. Instead, I was knocked violently forward, face first in the snow, before I could get my knees under me. An ice-cold tendril wound around the wrist of my bad arm and yanked it back brutally, causing pain to cut through my consciousness like a white-hot blade. The adrenaline gave me just enough energy to take a few more steps. Blood was pouring down my face, and I was dragging my now useless arm behind me in the snow. The thunder boomed right above me, and I knew the snow was coming, and that would be the end. I knew deep down I could not shrug off another dumping of the heavy snow. Not that I didn't try, but as it hit me, I fell forward limply. The thing swirled around me in the snow, rubbing against my legs, then disappearing, only to be replaced by another one. Then a sharp pain bit through the haze I was in. Something had sliced the back of my leg. The jolt of surprise and the new pain helped me to get to my feet again, even as I could feel more of them swimming through my legs and around my waist. I kicked at the things swirling around my feet, and suddenly my foot made purchase with something hard and resistant, very much like packed snow. All three had extremely concerned looks on their faces. "Are you okay?" the clerk said nervously. "Of course he's not okay," said the girl on the left, as inside and as alive. "That's okay enough," the girl on the right said grimly. She screwed the cap off a bottle of Captain Morgan and handed it to me. "Take these," she said, holding up to Poe, and then putting them in my mouth. I was too surprised to really resist. "Drink," she said, pushing the bottle of rum toward my face. I washed down the mystery pills with the rum, and while it burned going down, it was warm, and everything warm was good. "My friend, he was with me. Have you seen him? Did he make it here?" I asked. The two girls shook their heads. "You're the first one. Since we got here, our car got stuck. It wasn't bad then, but we were going to try to get it unstuck. Only we didn't get to the car." The girls looked at one another and were quiet. "There are things in the snow," I said. "No use pretending it wasn't true." Tears rolled down one of the girls' cheeks. "I need to call my roommates," I said. "Phones are out," the clerk replied, frowning. Then she shrugged. The four of us sat behind the counter for the rest of the night. The girls' names were Sarah and Braden. The clerk was Jill. I told them some of what happened, but not all. It turned out the pills Braden gave me were serious painkillers she took for monster cramps. The slices on my legs were wide, but not dangerously deep. I was able to move around once the pain ebbed a bit. "What time did I get here?" I asked, at some point, trying to pin down the sequence of events. Jill brought over 3 hot chocolates from what my roommate called the Crappuccino machine. Braden topped all 3 off with rum. 7:15, she said. "That can't be right," I said. "We didn't even leave until 7. And we stopped at the bank for at least 10 minutes, probably more." "No, that's right," Sarah said, taking a sip of her hot chocolate. "When we got you inside, I looked at the clock so I would know how long you were out. I know it was 7:15-ish because I remember thinking my sorority sisters would all be in the TV room watching Friends." "It can't be right," I said quietly, and the girls didn't contradict me for the rest of the night. We stayed behind the counter on the floor. It was better not to have the windows to look out of. Better not to be where you can be seen if something was looking in. Sarah and Braden eventually fell asleep. Jill and I smoked and endured the flashes of lightning and thunder in the snow. I tried not to think of what was out there, but I never succeeded. We still couldn't go anywhere, but we did eventually get phone service back. When we did, I called my roommates to tell them I was okay and to ask if Metal was there, but he hadn't returned to the house. I even made them look upstairs. Over the next few days, there would be a lot of questions and a lot of heartache. I tried to tell people what happened, but I couldn't get anyone to take me seriously. They nodded and gave me a pitying look. To them, it was just my traumatized mind making up a story to cope with the horrific event I had lived through. And who knows, maybe I am. But there's one thing that makes me think I do remember things the way they actually happened. They eventually found Metal, found his body anyway the day after the storm. The owner of the bar across the street went to drop his deposit at the bank. The authorities declared it was death by exposure, but I'm betting they found a lot more in that autopsy than anyone was ever told. Once the storm had cleared, for people had gotten lost in the storm and suffered the same fate as Metal. I wonder how many of them suffered the same fate. I've never really been 100% okay. Since then, physically I've recovered as much as I'm going to. My right arm is moderately functional, but I'm a lefty now. I transferred to University of Arizona for my junior and senior year. After graduation, I did outreach work at the equator. Story 2. I was hunted by a cryptid in a snowstorm. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior, the frigid wind and snow blowing in on me as those two empty eyes stared in at me like a predator, sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It didn't start out like that, of course. When I started out for my morning run, it wasn't snowing. There was snow on the ground. There had been a quick storm with some squalls that left half a foot of the white stuff on the roads just a few days earlier. The state took care of it pretty quickly, and travel was barely interrupted. Everyone went about their merry way, even me. The fact that I hated winter even more than driving a truck never entered my mind. Okay, that was a lie. It wasn't bad as cramped spaces go. There was lots of shelf space above the bunk. I had a TV mounted on the wall hooked up to a GameCube. There was a DVD player with an assortment of movies that I rotated out on a weekly basis. The only thing I really needed was food and a bathroom. I had snacks stashed around, sometimes in places even I didn't find for months, but it couldn't compare to a nice hot meal. Of course, there was a trade-off. More privacy meant walking further to get to the truck stop, sometimes a lot further, but I used that to my advantage. Nothing like a nice long walk to get the blood flowing to all those muscles I did use when driving. Unfortunately, the place was a local mom and pop operation, which meant they didn't have the money to stay open 24 hours a day. For restroom and supplies before going back to my truck and falling asleep, normally I try to keep a good watch on upcoming weather. For whatever reason, I hadn't that day. I woke up around 8 a.m. and looked out to a sea of white. It had snowed, and it had snowed hard. It looked like someone wanted to make up for the snow quota this winter and did it all in 8 hours. I dressed in my cold weather gear and went out to see how bad it was and if my truck would be going anywhere today. When I jumped out of the cab, my legs disappeared. There was at least 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was still putting it down. I trudged around the truck to make sure everything was okay, then got back in the cab, brushing off as much snow as I could first. I climbed into the bunk and turned on the news to the announcement that a major blizzard had hit the area. Wow, I thought, that's some great investigative reporting right there. They were calling for another foot before the snow stopped. Great time to call the boss and get my ear chewed off. "Why can't you get here?" he growled. "There's this stuff called snow," I said. "It lands on the ground and piles up until it begins to impede travel." "All right, smartass, when do you think you can be here?" "Well, seeing that I haven't even seen a snowplow go by and am sitting in a parking lot that probably won't get plowed out until much later than the highways, on top of the fact that my tires are nearly bald, even though I've been telling you for months they needed change. You'll say I have no earthly clue when you'll see your precious cargo." He was silent for a long moment. "Do you like your job?" he said through barely restrained fury. "Not particularly," I said, then added, "When the weather's like this, you might want to update your resume." With that, the line went dead. "Thank you for your support," I said to the dial tone. I settled back in, turned off the TV, and went back to sleep. When I first started out in trucking, a fellow driver gave me a tip that I never forgot. "Any time you have the chance to get some rest, take it." That little tidbit helped me tremendously over the years. A little extra sleep means a lot less coffee. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. When I woke a few hours later and peeked outside, it was still snowing. I looked at my driver's side window, and even my tracks were gone. I was feeling the call of nature and decided to brave the elements, to take the track to the truck stop for some relief. I felt a little silly for putting on all my cold weather gear, including gloves and goggles. That feeling didn't last long. It was snowing so hard I couldn't even see the truck stop. I drew an invisible line with the side of my truck, aimed in that direction, and started walking. I never read Call of the Wild. I never saw alive. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have been so eager to throw myself out into this blizzard just to go pee. Trudging through the snow in the driving wind was growing old quickly. I felt like I should have reached the truck stop by now. I paused and looked around. Two realizations hit me at the same time. My track hadn't been dead on, but I was close enough to find the place. My winter gear was starting to fail me, especially with the wind finding all the little places it could inject frigid air. As I approached, I breathed a sigh of relief at getting out of the cold, not to mention a massive cup of steaming hot coffee. I reached for the door, but it refused to open. Maybe it was frozen shut. I pulled harder, but nothing happened. I looked in through the glass and saw no lights on. It struck me how the walkway wasn't shoveled either. Oh no, I thought, the storm has them stuck at home. I tried to draw an invisible line with the outer wall of the store and hope it would lead me back to the truck. I felt my cold, wet feet protest as I headed back toward the warmth of my truck. I hugged my jacket, attempting to keep the wind out. The snow was up past my knees now and seemed like trudging through mud. If I got lost and couldn't find the truck, no one would come looking for me. They might not find my frozen body until spring thaw. That was a cheery thought, as if my journey hadn't been hard enough After a while, something caught my foot and sent me sprawling face first in the snow. I struggled to right myself and quickly wiped the snow from my face, silently thanking God that I had worn the goggles. I tried to get my bearings again, but curiosity nagged at me. What had I tripped on in the middle of a parking lot? I dug down and discovered the offending object. It was a parking space barrier. The bright side was I now had a point of reference and hopefully could correct my course. I looked around and found myself adrift in a sea of white. The store had disappeared, and the truck was nowhere to be found. I took a deep breath and used the barrier to aim toward where the truck should be. I remembered one key fact in the process. It could have just been my imagination. I'd been out in the cold for much longer than I planned, and it was time to get back to the truck. I was suddenly reminded why I got out of the truck. To begin with, I had to pee so badly. I finally got it out and started the yellow stream when the wind shifted direction, sending it spraying all over my pants. I quickly turned so that the stream was downwind. When I finished, I looked down at the front of my now wet pants and swore internally. Yet another reason to find the truck quickly. Wet pants turned to frozen pants, turned to dangerous pants. The wind rushing in my ears tore away my hearing. There wasn't anything out here to listen to, and yet I thought I heard something. I looked around, but only saw white. Was this my mind starting to play tricks on me like it did when I was driving and thought I saw the creature that doesn't exist peeking out at me from the trees? I turned back to my imagined destination, wondering if delusions were the first step in freezing to death. As if to answer, the wind hit me with a solid gust, knocking me down. If I didn't know better, I'd swear I felt a giant hand in the middle of my back before I fell. I looked up and saw nothing but snow swirling around, making mini tornadoes. I chuckled at the irony of them being called snow devils. I guess my own personal snow devil was pushing me around. I got up and started for the truck again. Every step felt like my feet were encased in concrete. I plodded on, trying to pull from whatever reserve energy I had to keep going. I couldn't die in the middle of a parking lot just yards away from my nice, warm truck. That would be the ultimate irony. I walked on, barely conscious, wanting only my 18-wheeled safe harbor from this merciless storm. My head was down. I wasn't even looking anymore. It didn't make any difference. I knew I would never find it. I knew it was like looking for a needle in a field of haystacks. There was no way I would ever get by. I slammed into something and fell back. The snow was so deep I just lay there like a turtle, unable to get off my back. I looked up and saw the thing that had hit me was the back corner of the truck. 2 feet to the right, and I would have missed it. I smiled, but it took a lot of energy. I focused everything I had into getting up. Adrenaline took care of the rest. I marched up to the driver's side door and reached into my pocket for the key to unlock it. I couldn't find the key. I ripped off my glove and searched again. Still no key. Despair smothered my mind. If I had dropped it one of the times I fell in the snow, was lost forever. And so was I. I leaned against the truck door, so close and yet so far. I could almost feel the heat through it. I smashed my fist into my leg in frustration, but felt more pain than I should have. I patted the other pocket and felt a lump. I tore off my other glove and reached into the pocket, pulling out the holiest of holies, the key. Tears streamed down my face and quickly froze as I stuck the key in the lock and opened the door. It took every ounce of energy I had left to climb up into the cab and collapse into the driver's seat. I imagined sitting on a beach with the sun shining down on me and the water beckoning. I fell asleep like this. I wasn't going there again until the parking lot was plowed, but looking around I couldn't imagine how long that might be. There was at least 3 feet of snow already on the ground, and it was still putting some down. I crawled into the bunk and covered up for a serious nap. I had plenty of snacks, chips, pretzels, and jerky, among other things. As long as I didn't binge, I should have been fine. I had drinks in the mini-fridge, too, but water wasn't a concern. All I had to do was bring some snow inside and melt it. I only needed to check one last thing to make sure I could outlast this storm. I looked at the fuel gauge. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the fuel gauge again. I only had a quarter tank left. That might last and it might not, depending on how long it took to get plowed out. Obviously, once the plow freed me, I could drive 100 yards or so to a gas pump. As I was looking at the fuel gauge, my eyes drifted to the windshield and the field of white that stretched out in front of me. The snow had finally stopped. It seemed bigger than any deer I'd ever seen. Its torso rode above the snow like it was a ship. Its face looked like it had wasted away to the bare skull, and it had massive teeth that went far beyond its jaw. It was rather haunting to look at. It was sniffing around in the snow. The more I thought about it, I began to realize that was probably the spot where I had taken a leak. I was mesmerized and horrified by this thing at the same time. I was nearly convinced my mind was playing a trick on me when it looked right at me and my blood turned to ice. Its look pierced my soul and made me wish I'd never come to this place. When it took its first step in my direction, I dove back into the sleeper and drew the curtain. I shook for reasons that had nothing to do with the temperature and was breathing in panicked gasps. What was that thing? Did I really see what I thought I saw? How could a creature like that exist? I tried to settle down and get my breathing back to normal, but my mind refused to let go of the image of that thing. It's just my imagination, I told myself. It's just a deer roaming around out there. I told myself that same thing over and over until my mind finally believed it. However, I did look through the curtain to confirm it. I didn't call it denial, I called it not pushing my luck. I pulled out a pack of cheese crackers and turned on the first Die Hard movie, The Try and Forget. About the deer outside, I was 15 minutes into the movie when I felt the first nudge. I didn't know what else to call it. It felt like something just nudged my truck. It was almost like when a strong wind gust pushed the cab. But I didn't hear any wind outside. The two sides of my mind engaged in a shouting match over whether I should check it out or ignore it. Fear threw its descents in and ignore it won out until the second nudge. Actually, it was like the 5th or 6th nudge until curiosity took over and made me go take a look. I peeked through the curtain and didn't see anything but snow through the windshield. I climbed out and looked through the passenger's window, but saw nothing. I chided myself for my skittishness when I looked through the driver's side window and saw a set of horns. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but they were gone. There were tracks in the snow that looked like deer tracks, only bigger. Or was that my imagination carrying me away again? I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the creature poking at my tires with its horns. I was fairly sure it couldn't puncture one with just horns, but I didn't want to chance it. I reached down, grabbed my club, and opened the door to scare it away, but again it was gone. I was beginning to question my sanity. Was this thing real? Was it my mind playing tricks on me, or was the creature toying with me, trying to draw me out of the truck? I closed the door and went back to my movie, but I couldn't get that creature out of my head. I was on pins and needles, waiting, listening, anticipating the next nudge. Before the movie was over, I fell into a fitful sleep. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I was in a tall building and there were bad guys everywhere. I had a machine gun, but had been better served hiding and picking them off one by one. I was sneaking up on one who was standing guard on an isolated floor when I turned the corner and there stood the dear creature. It was massive, standing on its hind legs, and its horns scraped the ceiling. It looked at me with those empty eye sockets from its bare skull face. It made a sound that was half grunt, half growl, then started towards me. I backed away around the corner, trying to get back to my hiding space, but as I turned to run, suddenly the creature was in front of me. I pulled up my machine gun and started firing short bursts. I hit it in the chest, but it kept coming. As I backed away, I shot it several times in the head. I watched as chunks of bone flew, but it kept coming as if it didn't care. I shot at its legs, hoping to throw it off balance, but it had no effect. As if it had had enough, it charged, pinning me to a wall with its horns. I looked down as the blood began to seep from my belly around its horns. It pulled back and charged me again and again, sending shockwaves of pain through my body and crushing my spine. It pulled back and allowed me to fall to the floor. Blood pooled around me as I tried to crawl away from the creature. I could only use my arms. I couldn't feel anything below my waist, which was a partial blessing because it cut my pain in half. After I had crawled a few feet, I suppose it had enough of toying with me. It stomped its foot down on my neck so hard I heard a snap, and my arms went dead. I could feel it tear into my back, ripping away pieces of meat. I could hear the sickening chewing and slurping as I was eaten alive. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I woke with a start, sweat pouring from my forehead, and looked around the sleeper cab looking for the creature that was tearing me to pieces. After a few seconds, I came to the realization it had been a nightmare. I turned off my DVD player and stuck my head out through the curtain to check on my fuel situation. The needle was well below the quarter mark, almost down to an eighth. I looked out through the windshield, and the snow had not magically melted. In fact, the wind had picked up, and now it was starting to drift. Where there was once an even field of snow, now there were peaks and valleys forming, like dunes in the desert. The store was still dark, and there was no traffic moving on the road. The sun was riding low in the sky, and I had yet to see another living soul. I wondered if my fuel would last until a plow could rescue me. Soon I would have to give some serious thought to conserving. It wasn't ideal. The thought of bundling up in blankets in the dark with no heater and no TV or watch wasn't exciting me, but it was better than waiting until my fuel ran out and I froze to death. As I killed the engine, I chided myself for not coming up with this plan sooner. I would have conserved fuel when the sun was out and the temperatures were higher. Now I was going to pay for my lack of foresight. I dug out every blanket I had stored in my closets and laid them over the bed, then tucked in for a long nap. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. When I woke, I was drowning in utter darkness. I panicked for a moment before I remembered where I was. I looked at my watch, and it was 4 in the morning. I pulled the covers off me and was immediately assaulted by cold air. I grabbed a flashlight and found my way into the cab. I turned the key on and waited with bated breath that billowed out in clouds that filled the cab until the engine turned over. As it roared to life, I felt even colder. I looked to my left and froze. My driver's side window lay in pieces on the seat and floor. I slowly turned to look at the passenger's side window when fear grabbed me. There was a face looking in at me, but it wasn't a human face. It was the ungodly face of the dear creature that had gored me to death in my dream. A river ran down my leg, forming a yellow puddle on the floor as I stared into the dark, hollow eyes of this thing sent straight from hell. It reared its head back and then smashed into my passenger's window, splintering it. It reared back again, and this time shattered the window, reaching in for me with its fierce long teeth. I jumped back and landed in the driver's seat full of glass. I knew I was dead. There was nothing I could do. I sat there as it entered the cab, coming for me. Its head was halfway inside when it suddenly stopped. It moved around a little bit, then roared in frustration. Its horns were too wide to fit in the window. It tried over and over to get in, but there was no way it could fit with the horns. As suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. I looked around to see where it had gone, but the darkness of night covered it like a shroud. As I was looking, it silently reached in behind me and would have had me if it hadn't breathed out, warning me of its approach. I dove into the center console as its deadly jaw snapped shut right where my spine had been. It continued its assault on this window, gaining ferocity as it frustrated itself by not being able to get a hold of me. I stood in between the two windows, hoping I was safe from either direction. It was then I decided to go back into my bunk and close the curtain. I covered up and reached underneath the bunk to a secret compartment and pulled out my .40 caliber automatic handgun. I took the magazine out and made sure it was loaded with all 10 rounds, then put it back and pulled back the slide and flicked on the safety. It made me feel a little better, but not much. I didn't know how true my dream was, or if bullets would do anything to this monster. I no longer had any illusions that this was a deer. It was something much more dangerous and terrifying, and it was after me. I covered up with my blankets again, holding my gun close. The heater wasn't doing much good with 2 windows broken out. I would try to do something about them in the morning when it was light. There was no way I was doing anything in the dark with that thing lurking out there. I lay there for an hour watching every second of the clock tick by, eyes wide open, ears listening for any sound. But there was none, just the wind howling in between the 2 broken windows, making my curtains flutter. Eventually, I recognized the futility of having a truck running and the warm air just escaping before it could even get to me, so I got out of my bunk, keeping my new best friend with me, and slowly made my way out to the cab, my head darting left and right to see if the creature was about to launch itself through either of the windows. I turned the key off, and before I could pull it out of the ignition, a set of horns smacked against the frame of the window, and the deadly teeth came in and snapped just inches short of my face. I whipped around and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. It snapped at me again, and I panicked until I realized the safety was on. I flicked it off and aimed, but the monster was gone. I didn't dare make a move toward the window for fear it would launch itself back in at me. I stood still as a statue and stared at the window it had come through, then slowly turned to the other side. I kept looking back and forth between the two, trying to keep my peripheral vision on both at the same time. I was shaking, not only from the cold, but also from the sheer terror of not knowing where or when this thing was going to show itself. I decided my cold weather gear would be my best option, so I climbed back into the bunk and put on as many layers of clothes as I could find. When I popped my head back out, I was met with the most terrifying sight imaginable. The monster had climbed onto the hood of my truck and was now bashing its head against the windshield, trying to make its way inside. I knew the windshield was wide enough that it would be able to get its antlers inside and I would be done. I pulled the gun up, aimed at its head, and fired. The explosion was massive. I instantly lost my hearing except for the ringing in my ears. I staggered back, but the monster kept coming. Not only had my bullet done nothing to the monster, it weakened the windshield, making it easier to get inside. The monster shook its head in surprise when the bullet ricocheted off the bone, and then continued its assault on the windshield. It hammered on the glass until it shattered into a million pieces. I was already aiming at its face and fired 2 shots before the glass even hit the floor. They both ricocheted off its skull, causing it to rear up just enough for me to fire 2 shots into its chest. It didn't collapse screaming in agony like I wanted, but I could tell it didn't like it either. It jumped down off the hood and disappeared. I stared out into the inky blackness, trying in vain to pick up any glimpse of it. I whipped around from one side window to the other and back again, waiting for it to show its horrid face. After what seemed like forever, I saw horns rising through the passenger side window. I fired a shot into its face and it disappeared. I threw myself back into the passenger seat when suddenly I saw its head rising in the driver's side window. I fired a shot, making it disappear again. I jumped up and threw myself to the other seat, knowing it would be on the passenger's side soon. Sure enough, 10 seconds later, it appeared and I fired another shot. It was toying with me. It disappeared and I threw myself over into the passenger's seat, waiting, aiming at the empty driver's window. But instead I felt teeth clamp down on my neck. It had fooled me. I shoved my gun up under its skull and fired a shot. If I hadn't been deaf from the first shot, this one right next to my ear would have done it, and yet somehow I heard it squeal in pain as it released me. I knew I had been inches from death. I reached up and touched the wound on my neck and came away with a handful of blood. I went back into my bunk, tore away a piece of sheet, and pressed it to my wound. Then I tore some more of the sheet and tied it around my neck to hold the bandage in place. I went back out to the cab only to see it crouching on the hood waiting for me. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior, the frigid wind and snow blowing in as those 2 empty eyes stared in at me like a predator sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It crawled in through the remains of the windshield. I knew I was dead. In desperation, I shoved the gun into one of its eye holes and squeezed the trigger. The sound it made was something I'd never heard before and never wanted to hear again. The scream was both a low guttural sound and a high-pitched shriek. It sounded like someone had unleashed a demon from the pits of hell. My mind screamed at me Get out of there. I fumbled with the driver's door and ended up falling out when it opened on a clear day. With no snow, I would have gotten a concussion or broken bone falling on the bare asphalt. With 3 feet of snow on the ground, I landed on a soft, cold pillow. It was the only time in the last 24 hours that the snow had helped me. I immediately jumped up and looked around for any place to hide, but there was nowhere. Everything was covered in snow. I glanced back at the trailer and realized the snow was so high that it reached the bottom of the trailer. I couldn't see underneath at all. I quickly dove under it, then turned around and tried to pile snow into the opening to hide where I had gone. I shone my light around at the beautiful sight of bare asphalt. I lay there on my belly, looking all around, trying to see in every direction at once to see where the monster would attack from. My breath blew out in billows of desperate smoke as I came up empty. There was nothing. The monster wasn't there yet. I didn't dare hope to imagine that my shot had killed it. If anything, it made it even angrier. It was probably destroying the inside of my truck at that very moment. What I didn't trust was that the monster wouldn't find me underneath the trailer. I looked around for anywhere I could use as a better hiding place. My eyes fell on the wheels of the truck. It looked like there was just enough room between the tires and the differential. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was better than the thing finding me. I turned around and slid my feet in first. The further I slid, the tighter it got. Ironically, the grease and oil from the differential helped me slide through a little easier. When I almost had my shoulders through, it suddenly felt too tight. I was stuck. I couldn't move forward or backward. Panic flooded my mind, and I struggled frantically like I couldn't breathe. After the longest minute of my life, I finally managed to maneuver my shoulders through and into my hiding spot. The hood of my coat did double duty of keeping me warm and completing my hiding place. I lowered it to the level of the asphalt and would raise it just an inch when I wanted to look out. The first half hour was the worst. The ringing in my ears had begun to subside, but I still didn't hear anything outside of my own breathing. The cold slowly leaked through my clothes. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour passed. My muscles started to cramp up. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour. I felt like my bladder would burst. Still no monster. I took it out of the magazine and stared at it. I used my coat to shine it up, then stared at my reflection in the gleaming metal. The edges of the snow around the trailer began to glow. I knew the sun was coming up. Darkness was no longer my friend. I was about to give up and crawl out of my hiding place when I heard it, a soft sniffing sound. I lifted my hood an inch, just enough to peek out, and there it was. Its head had broken through the wall of snow closed where I dove under the trailer. There were a few drops of blood from my neck wound, and it was sniffing them. Those drops would lead it right to me. Sure enough, it took a turn toward the front of the trailer and looked in my direction. I lay there still as a stone as it inched its way toward me. It was having trouble squeezing its massive body under the trailer, and I could hear it growling. With frustration, it came closer, crawling right toward me. There was no doubt it knew I was there. I closed my eyes and stuck the barrel of the gun under my chin. I felt its hot breath and smell the stench of death as I squeezed the trigger. Suddenly it shrieked, and I could feel the truck bucking above me. I opened my eyes to the most amazing sight. Its horns had gotten caught in the chains hanging down underneath the trailer, and it was tangled. It screamed and balked and fought to be free from its metal captors. It yanked backward so hard I felt the truck move sideways an inch. The differential was pressing on me now, and I had to shimmy over to avoid being crushed. I watched as the chains broke away one by one, and then it was free. I took the opportunity to crawl out from under the truck. It was useless as a hiding place now. It had already tracked me here. I was almost out when I heard another sound and saw a shadow pass by the other side of the truck. It was coming back, but it was trying from the other side. I crawled as quickly as I could. This was my chance. If it searched from the other side, it might not know I had left. I had no idea where I would go, but it was better to be out of a useless hiding place. Besides, I desperately needed to stretch and pee. As I stood next to the truck, I saw a large patch of red in the snow. I guess shooting it wasn't as useless as I thought. I took care of business first, being before I ruined another pair of pants. I finished and thought about where to hide. I looked up at the ruined cab of my truck when the nightmare crept around the corner. I stood there helpless. It had caught me flat-footed. I had nowhere to go. It stared at me as it limped around the corner. Its empty eyes seemed to exude rage. I pulled up the gun, had aim, when it disappeared in a moving mountain of snow. The snowplow had finally arrived. I watched as the plow pushed its mound of snow past my truck and over the edge of the parking lot. The driver backed up and stopped beside me. "You've been here all night," the driver said, "since before the storm. What happened to your truck?" he said, looking up at my shattered windows. I followed his eyes and thought for a moment. "Someone tried to rob me," I lied, knowing the truth was unbelievable. "I see you took care of it," he said, looking at the gun in my hand. I looked down at the gun and stuck it in my waistband. "It's been a hell of a night," I said. "Well, don't worry, the roads are getting cleared and it'll get you plowed out of here." "Thanks," I said. He nodded and backed up to continue plowing. I stared at them, looking for any movement. For 10 minutes I watched, and they didn't move. I was interrupted when the plow pushed another pile of snow over the side, covering the antlers. I watched for another 5 minutes just to be sure. The plow guy pulled up beside me. "You okay?" he said. I pulled my eyes away from the snow pile. "Yeah, I'm good." "You sure?" he said, pointing at my neck. "Yeah, I just got nicked by some glass," I said, remembering the teeth of the monster clamping down on my neck. "Well, I think someone just pulled into the store," he said. "Maybe you should get something for that." "I will, thanks," I said, knowing I would do no such thing. I wanted to avoid as many questions as possible. I climbed into the cab, brushed the glass off my seat, and drove over to the fuel pumps. After filling up, I started the long trip home. I kept my cold weather gear and mask on, having no windows or windshield made for a frigid trip. The heater was on max and aimed at my feet, keeping the bottom half of me warm. I didn't call for a tow truck because I wanted to get away from there. I never went back to that truck stop again. I didn't want to take the chance of that thing being alive. I never told anyone else about the harrowing encounter. I wish I could erase it from my mind. As I drove towards my home terminal through the endless stretch of trees, I saw one of the creatures peeking out at me that I used to think was my imagination. Now I know better. Story 3. The Snowstorm of 2009. I've always loved winters, so growing up in Michigan was amazing. Every year I was guaranteed to see snowfall. I hated those trips out to California. I missed getting to build snowmen and having snowball fights with my friends. It was my sophomore year of college at the University of Minnesota. I arrived home the second week of December. At the door I was greeted by my younger brother Derek, who at the time was a junior in high school, and my father. My mom died when Derek was about a year old, so neither of us really got to know her. My dad filled that void, though I wouldn't trade my dad for anything. The first thing my dad told me after I had gotten settled was that in 2 days a big snowstorm would be rolling through, the worst anyone had seen in years. I already knew this, of course. I had checked the forecast for the week before coming home just out of curiosity. In addition to this, my brother was having 3 of his friends over. Winter break had just started for him as well. My brother and I never had as strong of a bond that I wanted. I guess it's because we just have drastically different personalities. My brother's outgoing, whereas I'm generally pretty reserved. I have always had a small group of friends. The 3 of us even went to the same college. My brother, on the other hand, was popular in high school. He played on the lacrosse team, was the student vice president 2 years in a row, and was runner-up for freshman homecoming king. The 2 friends my brother was having over were 2 of his lacrosse teammates. They are the biggest pricks I think I've ever met. It was Thursday afternoon. I was up in my room on the phone with a friend while my brother and his friends were playing video games downstairs. At 5 in the evening, snowfall clouded the windows of our house, and the wind howled outside. At 5:30 p.m. the power went out. My brother and his friends all collectively groaned. My dad had been at work when the power first went out. He gave me a call and let me know he'd be working late and to know when he'd be home. He's an electrician that works for the city, so he'd be out trying to restore power to the area. I asked him how long he assumed it would take to bring the power back, and he assured me it'd take no longer than maybe an hour. Derek and his friends helped me search the house for flashlights and candles. We threw 2 wood logs in the fireplace and lit it ablaze. The 4 of us gathered by the fire. One of Derek's friends, Marcus, wouldn't shut up about how spooky it was. The living room we sat in was well illuminated by the fire and the candles we set up nearby, but everywhere else in the house was pitch black. It seemed as though there was an endless black void around us. I sat in silence while Derek and his friends complained about how long the power was out. At around 6:30 I got a call from my dad. The reception was spotty, but I could still make out most of what he said. He told me that it'd be a long time before the power was back on. He and his co-workers had no idea what was causing the outage, and were going through any scenario they felt was plausible, yet nothing seemed to work. The whole county and the 2 neighboring us were out of power. When I told Derek and his friends this, they all let out a loud groan. It was about 8:30 p.m. I tried calling my dad, but couldn't get a signal. I decided to get up from the floor in front of the fire and look outside. Derek and his friends chatted away about school drama and didn't care to see me leave. The final set of footprints was pointed directly at the window, and then they stopped. They didn't continue, and it didn't look like whoever had walked over had gone back over their steps. They simply stopped while facing the window and disappeared. I just stared at the footsteps, completely perplexed by them. That's when Marcus came up to me. "Hey, "What are you doing?" he asked. I looked at him and gestured to the footprints outside. He just stared at them, confused. At the time, I figure it was probably nothing. I began to walk away from the window when another footprint appeared in the snow. Then another. Something was walking up to the window. Whatever it was, I couldn't see. Marcus gave me a look of confusion and terror. The footsteps stopped once again about 10 feet from the window. "Hey, sir, I need some help," a voice called out. I was completely frozen. I didn't know what to do. My mind simply couldn't wrap my head around what I was hearing. It sounded like it was coming from outside, but no one was out there. "Please, hurt my leg. I think it's broken," the voice pleaded. It sounded like a man. He was probably older than me, but there was no physical evidence to go off of. "Could I come inside? It's freezing out here." Marcus stood frozen next to me. From the look on his face, it looked like he was about to shit himself. Derek and his other friend, Jacob, came up behind me. "Who is that?" Derek asked. Marcus pointed out the window. "Are you all just gonna fucking stand out there?" the voice shouted. The set of footprints ran up till they a foot away. There was a pound on the glass, and all of us jumped back. "Hurt, and all you do is stand there," he shouted. Derek opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I decided to break the silence. What happened to you?" I stammered. "My car. I was trying to drive through the blizzard. Something bit me. Then I swerved off the road and hit a tree." The voice seemed calmer. "Please just let me in. My phone is busted, and this was the first house I saw that had lights on." He started to cry. At this point, I didn't know what to say. Just go the fuck away," Marcus struggled to get the words out. Everyone in the room turned to Marcus. We all looked at him as if he'd just gone insane. "Fuck you," the voice shouted. There was another pound on the glass. "Let me the fuck in, assholes." "Okay, let's calm." I was cut off by the voice. "Fucking assholes," he shouted. The pounding on the glass was incessant. The man kept shouting for us to let him. We backed away from the glass and took off. I ran to make sure all the doors were locked while Derek and his friends hid upstairs. They were losing their shit, to say the least. After a minute, the pounding ceased. I stood by the front door, waiting to see if whoever was out there would try to bust down the door. But nothing happened. Everything was silent. Derek and his friends stood atop the stairs. "Is he gone?" Derek whispered. I simply shrugged in response. I thought about checking the window, but I just stood there. The four of us remained upstairs for the night. The power didn't come back till about 2 in the morning. When my dad came home, Derek didn't hesitate to tell him about what happened. After Derek finished his story, my dad told us that on his way home he saw 2 cops' cars and an ambulance at the site of an accident about a block away. Some guy had swerved off the road and crashed into a tree, however. His body wasn't found in his car. His body was found about a day later. 2 of his major arteries had been severed. Someone or something had hit him twice, once severing his jugular, the other severing an artery in his leg. He was completely drained of blood. Story 4. County. This is Ian Connor, doing a night watch by the Southwoods warehouse, checking in. Lana O'Malley, the nice old lady who ran the night dispatch, answered back. "You're coming in broken, hon, but I heard ya. Be advised, any backup from us might be unlikely in this weather. You take care, darling." 2 years ago, after I had been promoted to corporate security, I would have been mortified to be back here, right where I started my career. It had been in the family since they came over from Ireland a century ago, but our cousin had sold it to the company for development. Thefts around here were not uncommon, usually jobless backwoodsmen looking to pay for their addictions, but these were different. I was on my own as I looked around the 360-degree view through the tinted glass. I took note of my surroundings. The full moon reflected a brilliant blue light off the snow, and an old storage shed 100 yards to the right of that by the adjacent fence line, locked shut with a chain and padlock. "Oh, Danny, boy, the pipes are calling." Suddenly the guard shack shook, and there was a sound like an explosion from the direction of the locked shed. Locals usually used TNT to illegally catch fish, so it wasn't unusual. I led with my gun and flashlight as I cleared the shed. Nothing was there but a new hole in the ground, seeming to open to an underground cave. I relaxed. A sinkhole. They were common around here and could be caused by small earthquakes. The only thing that didn't make sense was that sinkholes caved into the ground. This looked like something had burst out. I couldn't think of any creature in the Ozarks that could do that. Puzzled, I locked the shed back up and went back to the guard shack, intently watching the tree line where the spotlight had shone. A black fire hydrant. My mind must be tripping this late, I thought. I had to focus. I slid the door barely open and listened through the howling wind. I heard the truck squeak to a stop in front of the gate, and two chubby figures clambered out of the back. I heard a loud, familiar hooting and hollering, and my heart sank. The Murphy brothers. No one had seen them since high school, when they stopped coming and moved further back in the woods, and much to the relief of all of us. They were typical violent, petty criminals. Anything they could do, they would do. And right then, I was between them and a wealth of valuable copper wire and propane. I recognized the two hairy beasts, Billy and Joe. Their brother Kevin must have been driving. He was the brains. Billy walked up to the padlocked chain and prepared to cut it. Then the truck engine cut off, and Kevin stepped out and yelled, "Y'all hold up. That generator by that guard shack is running. You reckon there might be somebody in there?" Billy lifted his bolt cutters like a weapon, and Joe pumped a shotgun. My adrenaline pumped, and I prepared for a fight. I drew my gun and reached for the steel sliding door. I began to pull. Then there was a slamming noise on top of the shack. I looked up and saw two small, round dents in the solid steel ceiling. I didn't even have time to consider what could possibly do that. Then I realized the black fire hydrant that appeared from nowhere. I turned and it was gone. Suddenly I forgot about the Murphys. My wild mind imagined a short black creature with short arms, not nozzles on the side of a fire hydrant. I heard Billy stop. "You hear that?" A loud rumbling growl came from above me. Joe screamed and pointed, but when his brothers looked, they saw nothing, and there was silence above me. The thing was gone. "What you see, boy?" said Kevin. Joe was pale. It was little and black. It had a big mouth full of razor teeth. It looked at me like I was dinner. Billy and Kevin laughed, but then Joe screamed again and fell forward, dropping his gun. A chunk of flesh was missing from his back, along with his coat and shirt. His brothers were laughing so hard it took them a second to act. That second I saw it. It looked up at me with a sick smile and a mouth full of blood. Small, black as coal, and to large, empty spaces where eyes should have been. It ran off behind the truck. The brothers turned in all directions, yelling incoherently. Now the memories all came back. I brought it here. I sang Danny Boy. They say when you think you're about to die, your life flashes before your eyes. It's true. I remembered all of Granny Mara's stories. How she told me on her deathbed that the tales of leprechauns, fairies, and elves were elaborated to sound palatable, but there were true things, fearsome things, that were real. I thought she was losing her mind, that age and senility were taking their toll. She went on. It followed us here from Ireland. It came on the ship. My own granny was the peacekeeper, kept it happy by singing Danny Boy when it was stormy out. But when she fell ill, it became a terrible thing. Tearing up the ship and threatening to sink us all, it did. But then I took her role. It can smell your blood, ye see. It knowed I was her kin. So I stepped out on the bow of the ship one stormy night to save us all. I did. Sang the most lovely rendition of Danny Boy. If I aren't bragging meself, I calmed it down, and there were peace once again. Now Granny Mara looked me in the eyes. Listen, lad, I didn't have any daughters. I had no one to take my place as peacekeeper, as was the tradition for hundreds of years. It's on you, lad. It's on you. Then she mustered her last words in the form of an old limerick. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Kevin yelling, "You there in that shack, you better talk or I am gonna start shootin'. What's this thing and what did it do to Joe?" Now I slid the door open and spoke loudly. "This is Ian Connor. You remember those stories Granny Mara told? Well, the truth was worse. That thing is mad, and it's mad at you, not me. Say your prayers, Murphy boys." Kevin yelled, "Connor, you liar, I don't know what." There was another growl from behind the truck, and I smiled as I spoke. "Mara told me an ancient limerick. It goes like this, short and black and void of eyes. He'll give ye quite a fright, and cold and wind with somber growl he only shows at night. He'll be your best friend or worst fear, so just don't make him mad, my dear. He'll not leave ye dead, but ye'll wish ye were. Just blackness and void, no skin or fur. If ye treat him with slight, he'll do this from pure spite. From your flesh he'll take a bite, your blood he can smell. He knows who's your kin. From there he'll decide if ye are foe or friend." Kevin's face twisted in rage, and he lifted his shotgun. "If that ain't the biggest load of hogwash I ever heard. Boy, you're dead." He popped the gun and lined up his sights, but dropped it as he screamed in pain. The dark creature had latched onto Kevin's right leg below the knee, and was violently writhing, digging its black fangs ever deeper into the flesh. It gave a satisfied low growl as it did, as if savoring a juicy feast. Kevin begged for help with crying pleas, but Joe lay moaning on the ground, and Billy stood frozen in shock. Kevin was tough, though. He reached down, grabbed his shotgun, and put the front of the barrel square on the creature's forehead. He froze a moment when it looked up at him, and, while clenched on his calf, smiled a wide, toothy grin with sickening glee. Kevin half screamed and half spoke. It's smiling at me. Die, you sick little demon freak." He pulled the trigger and blasted the creature point blank. For a second I was worried. If it was dead, at least it had helped my odds of getting out of here alive. I couldn't see through the smoke and swirling snow. There was only silence. Then I heard an even deeper, louder growl. It was alive, and it was madder than ever. I yelled through the blackness, "You done messed up now, Murphy. It was just having some fun. Now you made it mad." Kevin yelled, The barrel was twisted backwards with teeth marks in the wooden stock. It was apparently bulletproof and strong. The wind calm, and we could all see clearly. The creature was sitting like a dog and glaring at Kevin with its disturbing grin. It's playing with its prey, I thought. I grabbed the radio and pressed the button. Dispatch, Lana, T and Connor here. I froze for a moment. What would I say? If I said the truth, I'd sound crazy. I looked at the truck. My family had managed this thing and kept it contained for centuries. It was my turn now. Lana spoke over the radio. You okay, Connor? You sound under duress. There were emergency codes she was referring to, but I ignored it. It's just the Murphy boys. Lana. They're running toward Battle Creek Road, screaming some nonsense. Look like they took some kind of beating. You might need to dispatch EMS and both your deputies. I'd probably also call the head shrink down at the county hospital and give him a heads up. Lana sounded skeptical. Will do. Sounds like there's more going on. I suppose you don't care to elaborate. I kept it short. Don't care to. Lana was quiet for a moment before speaking. Always was some weird goings on down there at the Connor land. I knew when not to ask. Besides, seems like anybody that ever got hurt down there had it coming. Like the Murphy boys. I wrapped up the conversation with Lana and collapsed in my chair. I finally took a deep breath. But I didn't take my eyes off the truck. I didn't see anything in the cab, though. There was a loud slam on the roof of the shack. It was up there, and I could hear its quiet growl. I didn't reach for my gun. There would be no point. I recalled the last few lines of the limerick. Your blood he can smell. He knows who's your kin. From there he'll decide if you're foe or friend. I heard it gargle out a nose. Mara. Mara, I was shocked it could talk. It was an intelligent being. I answered, What do you want? It spoke, or rather growled an answer. Mara, Teglach, what was it saying? I remembered it was Irish Gaelic. It meant family. I answered back in my rusty Irish. Mara Teglach. Yes, Mara is family, I asked. Cadbom hath leet. What do you want? It answered, Danny Boiscale. Of course, it wanted to hear me sing Danny Boy. I recalled a mournful verse and sang, But when ye come, and all the flowers are dying, if I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an avenue there for me. It let out a low, satisfied rumble, almost like a cat's purr. It punched the roof and said, Hurries. Again. I answered but asked to question myself. Mochara, are we friends? Silence for a moment. Then, cared. Yes, friends. I sang it one more time. I sensed silence on the roof, so I dared to step out and look up. There it was gone. Then I turned to the shed as I heard a loud noise. The door had been pulled shut. It was gone. For now. That was a year ago. Ever since then, every time there's rough weather, I volunteer to work out here in the guard shack I'm riding in now. The thefts by the local criminal elements have stopped completely since word spread about something terrible happening to the Murphy boys. I've got to sign out now. It's snowing, and I hear scratching at the door. Story 5. The girl in the snowstorm. I've seen her again. The girl in the snowstorm. I didn't know that I was in danger the first time I saw her. On the contrary, it was an experience that I kept thinking about all winter. It was over a decade ago, and I was visiting a friend that morning to drop off a Christmas present for him. It was a few miles from home, but I enjoyed the walk, despite it being an even colder winter than usual. My mother had warned me to return home soon, as the local news was predicting a blizzard that evening, so I kept my visit brief and started home at afternoon. By the time I'd made it halfway, the wind was brutally cold, and the snow was falling so heavily that I could barely see where I was. It was too late to turn back and bunker down at my friend's place, so I had to keep walking home. I wore glasses back then, switched to contacts a few years back, and had to take them off. It was bad enough to see everything as white blurs, but it was impossible to see anything through wet, snow-covered lenses. Walking through a blizzard without being able to see is a helpless feeling. You can only hope that you're heading the right way, fighting the wind, not just to stay upright, but to make sure that you don't lose your sense of direction. You can't see the nearby buildings very well, and you're constantly on the lookout for familiar sights that can tell you where you're at. I followed the sidewalk as best I could, occasionally stepping off the curb or onto someone's lawn. It was in this blurry haze of wind and snow that I first saw the girl. The first thing I noticed was the red scarf blowing madly in the wind. She was walking in the opposite direction, and at first it looked like she was on the other side of the street. The closer she got, the more I questioned what direction I was looking in. Was she crossing the street? Or was I not walking on the sidewalk anymore? I could barely tell where I was. I took a moment to make sure I was still on the sidewalk, and by the time I confirmed where I was, the girl was only a few yards away. I could see her more clearly. She was wearing a mismatched assortment of winter clothes, and a lot of layers, even to hats. Her puffy blue jacket was oversized and unzipped, and underneath I could see that she was wearing another heavy coat. She didn't look intimidating at all. On the contrary, she looked vulnerable. She was short and notably thin, almost unhealthily so. I was almost 10 at the time, so I imagined that she couldn't have been older than that. The way she was bundled up in so many layers of clothes made her look uncomfortable and gave her an uneven, lumpy shape. I assumed at the time that she was poor, maybe even homeless. Instead of walking past each other, we simply stopped in front of one another. Something compelled me to stare down at her, and she looked up at me with a sort of vague expectation. Her hat and scarf covered most of her face, leaving only her eyes and part of her cheeks visible. Her eyes were big and dark, like black holes against her pale skin and the surrounding snow. I lost myself in her stare, like I was falling into her eyes. It was like I was in some sort of trance, pulled to her without realizing it, made utterly passive. She took her earmuffs off, but didn't speak. "Hi," I said weakly, not knowing what to say. She looked me up and down, and something about that made me shiver, even in the cold. It was like she was taking stock of me, of what I had to offer. Before I could ask what she wanted, the girl held her hands up. They were pale, shaking, bare. The girl didn't have any gloves. Something about the way she looked at me so impatiently made me look down at my own gloved hands. I didn't have a particularly good set of gloves, but they were the only pair I had. I looked at her again, and something about her big, dark eyes made me want to give them to her. I took my gloves off and held them out for her to take. I almost regretted it, but then her freezing hand touched my bare skin as she took them, and they were so cold that I knew I was doing the right thing, she put the gloves on, looked up, and smiled. The scarf was still covering most of her face, but I could see it in how her cheeks raised up and in the sparkle of her eyes. As she started to walk past me, I realized that the blizzard was easing up. I put my glasses on, turned around, and looked at the girl. She had stopped walking and was staring down at the gloves, admiring them. "Merry Christmas," I mumbled to myself, and she looked back at me, almost as if she could hear me over the wind. I waved, realized my hands were cold, and shoved them into my jacket pockets. She nodded and turned around, continuing her walk to wherever she was going, but not in any sort of hurry. I was only a block away from my house, so my hands weren't cold for very long. When I walked inside, my mother immediately noticed that they were missing. For some reason, I didn't tell her the truth, despite how chivalrous it would have made me sound. I lied, suggesting that I must have forgotten them at my friend's house, and went up to my room. Something about the girl made me want to keep our interaction private, like it was something special. I sat down on my bed and mulled over what I'd just experienced. I didn't exactly have a crush on the girl, but something about the way she stared at me was so compelling, like I was defenseless against it. I wanted to see her again. I looked out from my bedroom window, somehow expecting to see the girl, and she was there, on the other side of the street. It was like she'd been waiting for me. I opened my window, blasted by cold air, and waved at her. She waved back, then started walking away. I watched her walk out of view, wondering who she was, where she had come from, and if she was ever there at all. Something about her felt unreal, like I'd vividly imagined her. I'd hoped to see her again that winter, but never did. Whenever I went outside, shoving my hands into my pockets, I wondered if she still had the gloves. Whenever I got home, I checked my window to see if she was standing on the other side of the street again, waiting for me. I daydreamed about running into her during one of my walks, which just so happened to become much more frequent, but I never saw her. Not as a child, anyway. That year was memorably cold. Blizzards moved in and out. Roads were all slick with ice, and inches of snow fell every day. We always had some snow, but that year was bad. This winter's been pretty heavy so far, but not on that level. We've had a lot of snow and ice, but no blizzards yet. It's the perfect kind of winter for long walks in the snow. Last week, I was enjoying the season and going on a long walk. It was snowing lightly, and the sky was a solid white of clouds. It was a very peaceful walk at first, but then I saw something in the distance, on the other side of the street. It was a girl, short and bundled up in layers of winter clothing. Most of the clothes were different, but the red scarf brought me right back to that meeting a decade before. It was her. I'd been obsessed with this girl as a child, reminded of her every winter for years. It was like opening a time capsule of memories, buried in the back of my mind since I was in middle school. But at the same time, it was more than memories. She was standing right across the street, in mostly different clothes, but the girl was the same size, the same height, like she hadn't aged a day. I was lost in that impossible thought, wondering if she was just really short and petite. When I realized that she was crossing the street and heading in my direction, does she recognize me? I wondered. I couldn't move, and I didn't want to. Something was so disarming about the surreal sight of this girl from 10 years ago. I remembered wondering, as a child, if I had imagined her. Hadn't she followed me home? and waved at me from across the street. Did I just make that up and forget that it wasn't true? She stopped right in front of me and looked up. I remembered how I looked down into her large eyes, so dark that they looked black against the white of her face and the snow. And here we were again. I was an adult, and sure enough, she was still a child. Her scarf still covered up her lower face, but I could see from the upper half that she looked exactly the same, like she walked through time to see me again. However, the clothes had aged, her scarf was worn and stained, her jackets ripped in some places. She had a different pair of gloves that looked fairly new, and I wondered if some young boy gave them to her. Did he also think that he imagined her? She looked me up and down, and I remembered that she did the same thing last time, taking stock. I assumed, in the moment, that she was looking for something to ask me for, another article of clothing to keep her warm, and I was right. She settled on my scarf, and she lightly tugged on it, as if demanding it. I pulled off my scarf, ignoring how cold it made my neck, and handed it over. There was something so strange about the experience that I just felt like I had to go with it, if only to see where it was going. Like before, I was compelled by something in her stare to do what she wanted. I was transfixed by this impossible girl. Then she removed her red scarf, and I almost let myself scream. The skin of her mouth and chin were stained red, and large fangs jutted down from amongst her upper teeth. She looked up as she dropped her old scarf on the ground and started putting mine around her neck, giggling at the sight of my fear. I was grateful when she covered her mouth with my scarf, but still terrified. I was glued to the spot, but desperately wanted to run. She'd had a sort of disarming aura about her, but it was gone, replaced by danger. I felt compelled to get away from this bloody-mouthed child, but frozen in place at the same time. She laughed again, the light and innocent joy of youth, and then she spoke. "I remember you. Did you move?" I shook my head silently, otherwise unable to move. I couldn't stop staring at her eyes. At first, I'd assumed that they were brown and simply looked darker in contrast to the light, but now I could see the endless pits of blackness in her eyes. I could feel a sort of force moving from her eyes to me, compelling me to stay put and do what she wanted. She had me under her spell, and she knew it. It was funny to her. "Oh, I think I remember where you live, then," she said before giggling again. "Thanks for the scarf and the gloves. Stay warm." She walked past me. I heard her footsteps in the snow get further away, but couldn't will myself to turn around. I didn't want to see her right behind me, admiring her new scarf as she'd admired the gloves I gave her a decade ago. Would I have waved at her, too, if she was there? I imagined that I would have, if I had the feeling that it was what she wanted. When I got home, I locked the doors and windows, willing myself not to look out and see if she was waiting for me again, like she had been the first time. I haven't left the house since. I've tried to convince myself that she was imaginary, but I'd rather be terrified than let myself believe that I'm crazy. My mom asked me if I was okay yesterday. I brushed it off and asked her about the heavy winter a decade before. She recalled that it was particularly bad, even worse than they thought at the time. When I asked what she meant, she told me that the local news kept running stories that following spring about a few missing people who'd been found after the snow all melted away, dead on the side of the road, as if they'd just killed over and been covered by the snow without anyone noticing. My mom remembered that one of the missing was from this side of town. I've since looked into it, and this side of town is really only a mile or so away from our home. The article I found mentioned that the person who discovered that body mentioned that there was dried blood on their coat and neck, like they'd cut themselves falling and bled to death right by the sidewalk. I have my own theories. You may be wondering why I'm staying indoors when the girl from the snowstorm knows where I live. The thing is, I'm not sure she can enter my home without an invitation. Either way, I'm not going to risk going outside again. Not that I have the courage to in the first place. I can barely will myself to look out the window at this point. I don't know what to do besides share my experience with all of you in the hopes that you're also careful this winter. Even if you're not a local, there's no telling how many of these things are out there. And if you have to go outside, bundle up, stay warm,